Welcome to the Dashboard Effect Podcast. I'm Brick Thompson, and today I have with me Will Trickett, who is one of Blue Margin's solutions architects. How's it going, Will?
Doing good. How are you, Brick?
I'm good. So today we're going to be talking about a topic that has come up in a lot of our previous podcasts, but sort of interspersed throughout. And I wanted to just focus in on this topic since this is something you do and are very well aware of, and that is, how do you interview an SME or stakeholder in order to build a report that really meets their needs? And I'll preface it by saying it seems like this would be obvious. Like, how hard could it be? Ask them what they need. They'll tell you, you build the report. But it turns out you can actually get tripped up if you don't follow a methodical approach and make sure you sort of check all the boxes. So with that, why don't you start telling me, like, how do you go at this when you start a project?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess to start, I'd say we probably learned the hard way as an organization by probably doing it wrong a few times and then just learning some best practices. We like to focus on kind of 4 particular questions that really drive those conversations. And I feel like by the end of those 4, you can generally have a really good sense of, is this going to be valuable, or are we just building something to build it?
Okay, so it's like 4 areas of questioning, not just 4 questions.
Right, yeah.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
So what's the first area?
Yeah, so the first one we ask about is just the business goal of the report. And the reason we start with that is I think a lot of times we get stakeholders that come and they say, here's what we want built, here's all of the metrics and slices, and they just hand it to you to build. And what we find is it's really helpful to just zoom out first and say, okay, why are we tackling this effort in the first place? Help me understand what the return on investment is that's intended for this report. Are we trying to save someone time for manual reporting? Are we trying to generate more revenue because we have increased visibility? There's a lot of different examples there, but that's the first thing we try to zoom in on.
Okay, so it's really, what is the business goal?
Right.
What are we going to be affecting in the business by having this visibility that the report provides?
Exactly. Yeah, and one example just to help kind of frame that. So we have a client that we've worked with for a number of years. They do medical imaging, and they have kind of this referral process that comes from doctors who send them patients who need to get scans.
Okay.
And then from that point when they receive this order, there's like 15 to 20, I think, different stages that the person goes through before they actually get to recognize a revenue on that order. So working with them, the first thing we identified was that conversion between those different stages was going to be crucial. And when we asked this question, they said, well, for every 1% in conversion from the start to the finish of that process that happens, we generate an additional $1 million in revenue just from bumping that number up. So that helped us frame, okay, this is super valuable, and we know that we're trying to get people from A to B. That's the key here.
Right. We know what the goal is conversions.
Right. Exactly.
And so the goal of the report then is to help with figuring out how to increase the conversion percent. Because a 1% increase is $1 million of revenue.
Yep, exactly.
Great. So after you've really identified the business goal, what's the next area you go after?
Yeah, so after the business goal is specifically the personas who are going to access the report. A persona is just like a group of users that kind of have the same maybe level in the organization or a similar job title.
Same function, yeah.
Yep. And so it just represents who's going to be viewing this, and that helps us kind of identify with the audience what the particular view is that person might need. Okay.
And have you ever had a case where you built a report where you didn't understand the personas well and had it not go well?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. I think what tends to happen is you might think you know who the personas are, and then sometimes there'll be new users that are introduced later. So we've definitely had that before. I can think of a couple of cases where maybe the initial group we gathered the requirements from, we asked these questions. It was kind of clear on what the requirements were, and then after we're into the report build, we find out that there's kind of this unknown shadow person who's actually really a key stakeholder and is going to be accessing this report. And they might have very different ideas of what needs to be viewed than the other group. So
you've built a report.
Yeah.
You're presenting it. This new persona that you didn't know about shows up and says, what? This isn't going to meet my needs.
Yeah. I'm going to need a whole nother page for this. And
so you're hopefully not back at the drawing board, but you're needing to do a bunch of work to get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So really important then to drill down. And I'm guessing that you somehow need to dig in and try to figure out, is there a hidden persona that maybe that the stakeholder who you're interviewing is not aware of?
Yeah, I think that's super helpful if you can. And I think it just highlights really the fact that, different people need different things, and you need to really build things to a certain group of people. Make sure that's clear who that is.
Do you always want to talk to that persona?
Absolutely, yeah.
Will you ever proceed without being able to talk to that persona?
90% of the time we would require it, maybe in certain cases if it was clear what they needed. But I think generally speaking, you want to get on the phone with them or at least get their input via email or something.
Because you don't want to have the telephone game of the persona told the person who's telling you, and it gets a little bit muddy. Changed.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So then what's the third area of questions?
Yeah. So once we know the goal and the user, then we're asking what questions are you trying to answer with this report?
Okay. Questions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is kind of the next layer down. We're really trying to understand what are the knowledge gaps that they're looking to fill with the report. Maybe there's, just not good visibility into a certain area. I think, back to that conversions example, one thing there is, a lot of different patients had demographic characteristics that might suggest that they would be easier or harder to convert. And then also
maybe age or
age, gender, location, things like that.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to really identify were there characteristics that we could find that would help them target those populations to keep converting through the funnel.
Yeah.
And then secondly, within the different stages of the funnel, there might be one particular area where it took a long time for them to convert to the next stage.
Yeah.
And so another piece of that was, is there an association between the length of time something is stuck in a bucket and whether or not they convert? So those, when you kind of start to understand those questions, then you can design a report that answers those effectively.
Yeah. Okay. And so you want to make sure then that it answers questions that's going to allow the user of the report then to go and do something about it. So I'm assuming in those examples that would allow them to fine tune their funnel management processes, that type of thing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And figure out ways to help certain demographics get this diagnostic test that the doctor ordered.
Yep.
Or figure out if there's a way that you can make the process of getting a person in go smoother so you don't get stuck in one of these buckets of the whole process.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the other side of the coin is, like you said, what action do you take with answering that question, right? And
Yeah.
I think you get some of that as you understand what they're trying to answer.
Yeah. And then I'm guessing you also want to make sure, all right, this is contributing to the original goal that we talked about. I mean, the example you're giving, obviously it does, but there might be cases where it's not quite so obvious, where you can sort of get lost in okay, we're answering all these questions, but is it really getting us to that goal?
Yeah, right. And this would help kind of weed that out to make sure that you are delivering value with what you end up sending to end users.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you said there were 4 areas of questions. What was the fourth one?
Yeah, so the fourth one is the lowest grain. We're asking them what are the particular metrics and slices of data that you need to support answering those questions. And again, that's sort of where most people start is what are the things that you need on this report, right? But we like to keep that last so that way we understand all that context. And then we can say, based on these few questions we're trying to answer, here's the things that we need to solve that. And that's what we use to inform our design. So it's just a inverse way of thinking.
Yeah, because you might think you want to start with, okay, what metrics do you want?
Yeah.
What are the measures that you need to see? You get to those, but understanding all that context before you get to that is really important to making sure that you're coming up with the right metrics.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of as a side note too, when you're taking the time to design a report, I think most developers have reached a point where they're just stuck. They think they know what they want to build, but there's a blockage. You just don't understand exactly what the user needs. And if you've answered those first 3 questions, I think it helps you in those moments say, okay, I actually need to focus on this more or this more versus just kind of being unclear on what the goal is.
Great. Okay. So metrics are obvious.
Yep.
The numbers, the measures, that type of thing. Slices is really just how you're looking at the data in subsets, right?
Right. Yep.
So maybe you actually, in your earlier example, you want to look at data by certain demographic characteristics, or maybe you want to look at the data by geographical regions or that type of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example. Yeah.
Okay. Those all make sense. So I understand the 4 areas. It sounds like it might be a lot of work to get through those. What's your typical amount of time? Let's say you're the report engineer working on this. How long does it take you to go through this process, typically?
Yeah, I think it's 45 minutes is usually what it would take.
Okay, so we're not talking, this is going to take hours and hours.
No.
But it's also not, hey, you can send me an email telling me what you want and I'll get it done.
Right, exactly. I think to do it well, you need the time, and it shows if the stakeholders invested in making sure that the report is going to be really actionable too. But yeah, 45 minutes you can run through those questions and get a pretty good sense of what you need to build.
Okay, great. I know there's a lot that comes after this, doing wireframing and building a first draft and having to get the data to validate and all that stuff, but we'll leave that for another day.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, appreciate your time. Thanks, Will.
Yeah, thank you, Brick.
Okay.